Welcome to another Navia Freight Market update. During these updates, we try to give you freight information that will help you make better, smarter supply chain decisions. We will be talking with our team members from all over the globe about sea and air freight markets.
Welcome back, Dave. Thank you for joining us. There's a lot of movement happening in the freight market. Tell us, what are you seeing? What's going on? We're seeing some big rate changes here as well. What are you seeing on your end?
Definitely a lot going on in the market, Greg. So we continue to see significant GRIs be implemented and continue to hold here on June 1st. This is kind of a trend that's continuing now through May, and it's been driven by reduced capacity and unexpectedly much stronger demand. Just about 6 to 8 weeks ago, we were talking how demand continued to remain weak.
Yeah.
Well, that really shifted, and there are a couple of reasons because of that. The first reason is we are starting to see importers begin to push their purchase orders up in order to try to avoid larger increases in fuel. And the expectation that they have is that the market will become or continue to be more and more difficult throughout the remainder of 2026.
Yeah.
They also were trying to get a lot of importers took an increase in NAC pricing, even if it was a modest increase. And so importers were also looking to try to get product out on the old NAC rates prior to the new tariffs being implemented, which, depending on the carrier, were anywhere from the 15th of May to really the 1st of June. And so you saw that influx. We know that the Amazon Prime Day has been moved forward by approximately 3 weeks, and unbelievably, that does impact the market as a number of importers are trying to get that product in to be in place for Amazon Prime Day.
Yep.
We also have a lot of the carriers, especially on the NAC side of things, beginning to announce and implement peak season surcharges to kind of account for this. So with the reduction in capacity, with the implementation of summer schedules, what we consider to be a short-term real influx in demand, the carriers have been very successful in really pushing prices much, much higher than initially expected.
One thing that comes to mind, so you mentioned obviously there's a big increase in demand there from various factors, front-loading, Amazon Prime Day, and the NAC rates. On the capacity side, is that just we're seeing a lot of blank sailings?
That is part of it. They have, carriers continue to announce blank sailings, but what we are expecting as we move through June, and especially getting into the beginning of July, several carriers like Maersk, ONE, they had started to announce extra loaders. So we are seeing carriers begin to announce plans for adding capacity into the Trans-Pacific eastbound market. Most of that will go into the LA Long Beach area.
Yep.
That will certainly begin to alleviate some of the demand pressure and work through some of those backlogs. And what we are expecting and continue to hear from our sources is that long range demand forecasts are still relatively weak, and that we think the market will begin to ease as we get into the beginning of July. And what we would expect in that case is that pricing begins to come down from current levels.
Okay, so essentially it's a bit of a blip on the radar for the moment. That's the expectation, because we've got a dip in demand predicted later in the year and then some more supply coming into the market as well. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of our customers will be relieved to hear that. I guess that all depends on what happens on the fuel side of things and the geopolitical side of things as well, I assume.
Absolutely. That continues to be a pretty strong variable in this consideration. And unfortunately, I mean, for those of us in the U.S., it's a bit of a roller coaster ride. Every day we hear that we're close to a deal, and then the next day it doesn't really seem to be like we're that close. And we're kind of going through this cycle. As soon as we do reach a deal, whether that be the initial memorandum of understanding, which would put or extend the ceasefire for an additional 60 days, open up the Strait of Hormuz, that will begin to start to relieve the bottleneck that has been in the Middle East for the last 3 months. That will certainly start to see things kind of work their way through. We are not going to see an immediate relief in fuel surcharges and oil, but what we need is that supply chain to start moving, which will certainly start to alleviate some of that pressure. I think the other big thing when we talk about demand is if you look at the Retail Federation, they're still predicting pretty significant year-over-year declines as we go into Q3. And I think publications like the JOC, they're putting out articles that the historical peak season is no longer in place. We're going to continue to see these interesting peaks and valleys throughout the year as importers become much more flexible and agile to really move things, move their production very quickly in order to try to counteract risk to their supply chain. So again, we certainly are forecasting weaker demand towards the historical peak season, and I think the Retail Federation is predicting year-over-year declines between 5 to 8%.
Interesting conversation for another day, but thank you very much for those insights. Appreciate your time as always, Dave, and we will see you next month. Welcome, Ioannis, to another Freight Market Update. Thank you for joining us, as always. Let's start off with the situation at the moment in Asia. What are we seeing in terms of congestion, demand, supply? What does that look like right now?
The last couple of weeks have been quite, I would use the word interesting, out of Asia, particularly out of Northeast Asia. So China is pretty much heavily, not necessarily congested as such, but what we're experiencing is a lot of rollovers for pretty much almost all carriers coming into Oceania and specifically Australia. Initially, we were under the impression that this is more of a supply, of a capacity issue, because there were some blank sailings here and there are still omissions from specific Chinese ports. However, this has been going on for a couple of weeks, so we can quite confidently say that it is also a demand issue. We could consider it a peak season, an early peak season, because definitely that's how it looks. Some carriers are better than others, but the overall sentiment and feeling is that Northeast Asia into Australia, space-wise, it's really, really tight. There are consecutive weeks of rollovers from carriers. Utilization is extremely high. Vessels are sitting at north of 110 utilization, a roll pool that has been going for the last couple of weeks. The good news is that although we're approaching the traditional peak season, come July, we're less than 1 month before July, but we have already seen some announcements about new services coming into the market out of China, as well as some extra loaders. Hopefully that is going to alleviate some of the pressure. So as we move into the traditional peak season, the backlog will be cleared, and that will allow for a better assignments of new bookings and cargo for southbound cargo out of China. Southeast Asia, again, is a different animal. It's much more stable, I would use that word. We haven't seen the rates go significantly up, and if there are any rollovers, they are quite, I would say, not consistent and one-off case.
And in terms of so it sounds like demand is the main driver here rather than supply. Can you give an indication of when you say there are some omissions and some blank sailings, is that typical amount for this time of year? Nothing that more than you would expect, right? Just to confirm.
That is correct. No, what we need to keep in mind and what we are seeing is that capacity out of China is consistently north of 100,000 TEUs. That is out of Far East into Oceania on a weekly basis. That should be an adequate amount of capacity in order not to face the issues that we're currently experiencing.
And I guess the fact that there's extra loaders or extra services coming out of that region indicates that the carriers know that there's extra demand to be taken advantage of as well. The other thing that I wanted to just ask you about is Europe, any issues out of Europe at the moment into Australia?
Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that we haven't experienced so far. What we need to consider, though, is that currently we are already into the European summer. We have already seen some water levels at the Rhine River being reported as low. There is a report of a super El Nino coming into the weather system, so that might affect especially the North European ports, the likes of Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Hamburg, in the not so distant future. Because if the water levels are low at the connecting rivers of these big ports, then obviously there are going to be additional delays when it comes to berthing with vessels.
Interesting. So that's a wait and see situation there. In terms of the rates, obviously let's talk about the increase in demand. I assume that means that rates are also increasing. Can we also touch on surcharges at the same time if we can?
That's correct. Well, when it comes to ocean freight, what we need to keep in mind and what we need to look at is, for example, again, I will refer to the Shanghai Containerized Freight Index, which has been increasing consistently the last couple of weeks, and that gives again the general sentiment about where the ocean freight lies out of China into Oceania. When it comes to freight surcharges, unfortunately, the situation in Hormuz is still ongoing. So pretty much all of the carriers are still applying some additional surcharges that are BAF-related, bunker-related, if you want, in order to make sure that they capture all of these increased bunker oil levels, which we have been seeing since this situation started back in late February, early March.
And any view on when that will cease?
Well, to be honest with you, it's anybody's guess. We have seen and we have heard that things would escalate, that things would then de-escalate, but it's I don't think that anyone with who doesn't want to gamble would make any prediction. It's pretty much it's up in the wind. It's anyone's guess.
Awesome, insightful as always. Thank you very much for your time, Ioannis, and we will see you next month. Welcome, Alana. Thank you for joining us as always. Last time we spoke, there was a lot going on in the air freight market with the Middle East situation kicking off. As we know, the airspace was totally closed over that region for a period of time. Where does it sit now? And then maybe we'll work on the other air freight markets outwards from there.
We've seen a little bit of recovery with Emirates and Qatar starting to fly again, but we're seeing, there is still capacity taken out of the market, which is causing some pressure on rates in space globally. It's not just impacting those areas. So on the back of that space being taken out, we're seeing quite an early spike into peak season.
So we're seeing demand in sea freight markets being pushed forward to the front of the what typically is peak season a little bit later is coming forward. People trying to get ahead of fuel surcharge changes and whatnot. Are we seeing a similar trend in air freight, or is it a little bit different?
No, we're seeing air freight shifting into a more high cost and more volatile place. So I do think 2026 peak season will be quite hard to manage. Typically it starts in August, September. But we already have capacity constrained and the fuel costs are elevated. So, peak will be hard this year if that demand does hold up.
And working outwards to the Asia kind of hubs, what are we seeing there in terms of capacity and demand?
Yeah, we're seeing quite a big demand coming to Australia. We're on some of the main deck services, especially because we do have Qatar and Emirates taken out of the market. Obviously, the likes of Cathay and Singapore, who hub through Hong Kong and Singapore, they're quite constrained. So trying to move main deck cargo in is hard at the moment. And then on top of that, bookings are usually sitting on standby, moving on most of the Chinese carriers. So they'll sit there for a couple of days in the airport before they actually move. And there is a little bit of an influx of e-commerce coming through, which generally takes priority over general cargo as well.
Awesome. And lastly, on the China to the US front, what's it like looking on that lane?
It's in a bit of a peak at the moment. The fuel rates have increased and space is at a premium. So we are actually seeing elevated, we're up around US $7 per kilo, which typically is 2 points higher than it would be this time of year. So the fuel has calmed down. It was climbing week on week. It's kind of stabilized the past couple of weeks, but in saying that, when we do head into peak season, we generally see, that the Amazon rush, and then we lead into, the Black Fridays and then the pre-Christmas. So I don't see that it will drop anytime soon. We might see a week during that period where it might fall down if we don't have the e-commerce moving. But I think we will see either these levels to stay, or it will start to increase from here on out.
Awesome. Insightful as always. Thank you very much, Alana, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Greg.